Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I am delighted to be here with you. We are recording this show on April the 28th. It was my birthday yesterday. I've turned 64, and I listened to the song When I'm 64 by the Beatles, something I've been looking forward to doing for a while, and I feel great, and I'm really, really happy to be here. I have an 18-year-old son. He turned 18 on April 24th. What's really interesting is that when he was born, it just occurred to me organically, that was my birthday present. That was my birthday. So people often say, what are your plans for your birthday? That is it. It is celebrating my son's birth and his contribution to life, and obviously more so his contribution to my life. So I'm very happy and I'm delighted to be here. And even more so, I am here with a friend of mine. Her name is Fern Levitt. Fern, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Really nice to have you, and welcome back from Israel. Are you back for 24 hours?
Yeah, I've been traveling a lot because of the last film I've made, but hopefully I'm here for a while before I get back on another airplane.
Yeah, you know how I know that you're back from Israel? Yeah, like for a very short period of time?
How do you know that?
Because your energy is so relaxed.
Because I'm so jet lagged. Is that it?
Yeah,
But
you're
I'm
chilled.
totally jet lagged. Yeah.
You're very chilled. And why I say that is because Fern Levitt is a animal activist. She's a documentarian producer and director, and her films have covered such things as human rights, the Holocaust, discrimination against Afro-Americans in the U.S., animal welfare, and socially relevant issues. You know, there are people who do documentaries and they do it as a career and they enjoy it. And then at the end of the day, they go home and they'll sip a cocktail and they'll live life in a wonderful way. But I think, Fern, and tell me if you agree with me on this, I think that your commitment to your subjects are very, very real. Like, it's not a job. You actually said you don't do this for the money, right?
No.
Why do you do it? Why do you do documentaries?
Oh my God. I feel so lucky that I get to do this. I'm telling the stories of people that I admire. I've got to meet many and tell the stories of many of people who are my heroes. And also I'm fighting for causes that I deeply believe in. And hopefully through documentary, people are educated and will make a change. And so I feel very lucky that I get to do the work that I do. It's an incredible honor to meet the people that have made changes, made enormous changes in history, and now fight for causes that I deeply believe in. And documentary gives you a platform that can be very powerful. So it isn't just, it's not a job at all. There's nothing about a job about this. It becomes very much of a passion, and I live and breathe it well beyond when the film is finished.
One of the films you did is Sled Dogs, and we're going to get into that later on, but the genesis of the documentary itself was that you had a sense of how dogs were being mistreated. So you decided that you would drive from Ontario to Quebec, and at 12 o'clock at night, you went into a compound, an area where they kept these dogs, and you checked them out, and you found some awful, terrible things, again, which we will touch on later. Where do you get this feistiness from? Like, I was thinking to myself, I had this image in my head. You said you went with friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this image of, and I know it's not a direct analogy, but you'll remember when some Northern Americans went to southern part of America, of the States, to help with voting for the black Americans, and they were killed. And I was thinking to myself, how scary that must have been for you. Yet you had the courage to drive there. You had the courage to go into this compound, see what you saw, which was awful. You had no idea what you were going to see. Like, where does that feistiness come from? Is that from your parents? Where is it from?
Oh God, I think I was born that way. I really do know that I was born that way. I've always been someone who was feisty, someone who, if the rules don't fit, I fight against them. And also, I've had the privilege of meeting people that have put their lives on the line to bring about changes. I mean, what an influence to do this story and meet the people, the Little Rock Nine, who between 13 and 16 years old went to an all-white school and were harassed and mistreated every single day.
Yeah.
And, you have these role models that are incredible. And also Václav Havel, who became the president of a free Czechoslovakia. And in order to bring about a democracy in his country, where he never knew that he was going to live to see, he was harassed, he was imprisoned, and he never stopped. He never gave up. So I feel that if these people can do what they did under such dangerous circumstances, then I have a responsibility to do the same thing. I mean, if I didn't learn from them, then what was the point of doing these documentaries? But let me just tell you about that. In terms of why I went to that sled dog place, I was told that there was a gas chamber there. And these mushers were gassing these puppies and dogs. And I've done several Holocaust documentaries, Avrum, as you know, and I've been in the gas chambers. I've filmed in the gas chambers. And when I found out that there was a gas chamber and they were gassing these drugs, this was really personal for me. And the musher who told me about this had reported it to the SPCA, and they did absolutely nothing. And I was enraged that this was going on in my country, and that the people who were responsible were doing absolutely nothing, even though it was illegal, to stop this. So for me, there wasn't a choice. I had to go. If I didn't go, I'd never forgive myself.
Are you afraid of anything or any people?
Yeah.
Are you a fearful person?
Am I a fearful person? Well, yeah, yes and no. I admire the journalists that go into war-torn countries. I don't think that I could do that. I don't think I could do that. But then the last documentary I did, I filmed undercover. And one of the places I filmed was in Texas.
Yeah.
They have very liberal gun laws. And I thought, what would happen to us if we got caught? Because we did film undercover. But am I a fearful person? I mean, there's parts of me that are very fearful. And there's parts of me that are just say, fuck it, I'm doing it. And I do.
You just came back from Israel, which means that for the rest of your life, which you should live till 120, you are now able to say that you were in Israel when it was under attack from Iran.
Yeah.
Now, what I found phenomenal about the lead up to that attack was that my family who lives there, their message to me and to the rest of my family in the diaspora was, we're frightened we're going to die. And I said to them, I've never heard that from you before. Yeah. They've been there for the Iraqi Scud missiles, and they, of course, been there, on October 7th and so many other times in the middle. I've never heard that from them. The Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel lives. God will protect us. And at the end of Shabbat, after the attack, the message on our family app was, we're not dead. Did you have any fear you were going to die?
Not really. I don't have a death wish. I was nervous as the plane was landing in Israel. The thoughts that came into my mind was, what if they try to bomb this plane? So those thoughts were definitely in my mind. I'm just angry about what's going on. And when I'm angry, I have to act. And I'm angry about the anti-Semitism that is growing in our country and in countries throughout the world. I'm shocked by it. I'm completely dismayed about it. I feel horrible that my children are living through this time. And and for me, sending money just wasn't enough. So I had to go and act. And I feel that Israel holds it up for all of us, all Jews throughout the world. And they're the ones whose children go into the army, not me. They're the ones that live surrounded by people who want them dead, not me. So going there and helping was the least that I could do. And it was hard for me to hear their thank yous because big deal. I am there for 2.5 weeks, and then I go back home. But they're there to stay, and they don't know what the future is going to be for them. They don't know. So the least I could do was go and help and witness and bear witness to what they've been through and show support in any way that I could.
What was the undercurrent of their thank you? What were they saying to you?
That they didn't feel alone, that we cared, that I cared, that other volunteers cared, and it made them feel less alone and more supported. It really meant, I mean, when people would ask me when I was there in Israel, and Israelis would ask me why I was there, why I'm here. Are you here on vacation? And I said, no, I'm here to volunteer. They were very, very grateful that I had come. So
when you flew out, did you feel as if you were abandoning them?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
And you feel that now?
Well, I'm hoping to go back in October with one family fund. So, so it's not like I don't know when I'm going to be back, but I know I will be back. And also I'm considering, and I'm not even sure, when I do a documentary, I'm very clear what the film's going to be about. I mean, I'm really clear about it and clear about how I'm going to tackle it and the stories that I'm going to tell and the people I'm going to interview. I'm very clear about that. And there is an asking for me to do something about this growing anti-Semitism worldwide. And honestly, I can't, it's so enormous that I can't, this film, I can't see my way through it. And part of me is scared to tackle it. I don't feel I'm good enough, skilled enough, successful enough. There's my self-doubts coming in. And I don't even know where to begin.
I'll tell you an interesting place to begin. I am very positive, generally. And since anti-Semitism reared its ugly head, really, in October 7th, one of the things that struck me was, and quite frankly, before that as well, we have a lot of friends, Fern. The Jewish people have a lot of friends. There's a lot of very clear-thinking people out there. And I have friends, friends of Jews within my, realm. And when I watch social media, which I do a lot because I am committed to putting stuff out there, I want to understand it and know it. There are a lot of people who respect us as a people, who understand who we are, who see the legitimacy of Israel and our fight against terrorism, this time against Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran. They see it, they understand it, they know it. There's a lot of really fine folk out there. What's your take on that?
Well, their voices really aren't being heard. The voices of dissent are really coming from the university students, and that is really distressing. I went with a friend up to York University, and I went there to put up flyers of the hostages, but I also went up there to talk to them. And I didn't tell them I was Jewish, but I wanted to talk to them. And they were having a anti-Israel protest that day. And when I spoke to many of the students, they had no idea what they were talking about. They had no idea what the history was. They thought, one person said to me that Israel is the government of Gaza. They had no idea of what a terrorist organization Hamas is. And we can see all this support for the Hamas organization. They had no idea what life is like for the Palestinians living under Hamas. So, and I said to them, you're university students. You're supposed to do your research before you take on an issue. Where's your critical thinking? And how come you could be so wrong about taking this stand and having no idea what your stand is? I mean, what would happen to your rights in Canada as individuals if Hamas took over as our government? Do you have
under Sharia law? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any idea what it would be like for you to live under that as a man, as a woman, as a homosexual? Do you have any idea what you're talking about? And they
so that being said, what have you experienced anti-Semitism in your life?
Of course, I grew up. Of course, I have.
You grew up in Hamilton, Ontario.
Yeah, I grew up in Hamilton. So there were these remarks that were made to me. I remember at university, I had a part-time job in the summer working in a factory, and I remember someone saying to me that there's good and bad people in the world, but Jews are, I remember she said, but Jews are all bad. They're all bad.
Yeah, we're the worst.
And then I said, well, what do you think of me? She didn't know I was Jewish. And I said, she said to me, you're a lovely person. And the next day I came to the factory wearing a great big Star of David. So, but also, yeah, like screw you. But my daughter was, I had a really positive experience because my daughter, a group of kids her own age swarmed her and made all kinds of anti-Semitic remarks to her. And I knew the parents, and I called the father of this child and told him, and he said, well, boys will be boys. And I thought, boys will be boys. And I called the police and told them what happened. And the police went over to their house and said to them, if that ever happens again, if a child ever does something like that, and this child was 13 years old, you will be held responsible. And then they came over to her home and said to Dana, in this country, you are protected. And that was really powerful. So yeah, it's really distressing. And I felt, and when I was coming back to Canada yesterday, I felt that I'm coming back to a country I don't even know. I really don't know this country anymore.
How so?
Because I always felt very safe here as a Jewish Canadian. And is it safe for me to walk down the street wearing a Star of David? Is it anymore? I don't think so. And I wouldn't do it without my husky. So
well, let me ask you a question. You drive on Shabbat. You're not religious, nor am I.
No.
When we drive on Shabbat on the Sabbath on Bathurst, around 12 o'clock, when everybody's coming out of synagogue, we see religious Jews with their fur hats and their payas, their side curls, and their black coats, and they're walking freely, and they seem confident.
That's courage.
It is courage, is it?
Well, they're obviously Jewish.
Yeah.
And, if I'm nervous about wearing a Jewish star, and they're so obviously Jewish with all the threats and with all the threats that are going on these days, and physical assaults as well, I think that's pretty gutsy things to do.
So some of the people whom I've interviewed on this show include, Nir Mammon, who is a 47-year-old father of 5 who lives in Richmond Hill. He returned to Israel to fight. And he was in Hebron. He's in Gaza. He came back, and I interviewed him upon his return. And now, Fern, he's going back to Israel to fight again. And I asked him a number of questions. One of which is, how do you make
courage, Avrum? That's
courage. I asked him, how do you muster up the courage to do that? Being a father of 5 children, all under 20, one of whom is little. He's 4 years old. How do you do that? Where does the courage come from? And I also asked him, amongst other people, Hillel Halkin, who's a well-known translator and author, what is the genesis? What is the root? Why do they hate us so much? Apparently, we are the most hated people in the world. And if that's too hyperbolic, fine. One of the most hated. You have any take on that? Why are we so hated, Fern?
Oh, isn't it common? I think it's jealousy. I think that when people are dissatisfied with their own lives, instead of looking inwardly, they look outwardly and blame it on someone. I mean, wasn't it Hitler who blamed what was going on in Germany on the Jews, instead of the fact that they were going through economic horrible times after World War I? So it was easy for for Hitler to have a scapegoat. And I think that people who are unhappy with their own lives, or racist, or whatever that is, instead of looking inward and examining their own lives and what they can do to make their lives better or more fulfilling, they look at others and say, well, it's not my fault, it's their fault. And we are a successful group of people. We're very successful. And they don't look at us and think, well, what is that? Is it because they value education, which we do? And I think that we hold each other up. If it wasn't for I was not a good student in school at all. And if my friends growing up in Hamilton, they were all going to university. And because they were all going through university, I was going to go to the university as well. And I certainly didn't have the marks to go. But if they're going to go, then I'm going to go. So education is a very important value for us as a community. And I think it's just pure jealousy. I don't know, Avrum, what do you think?
It's a good question. I think there's a part of it that is it's jealousy, it's envy. I think it's age old and goes back to the idea of we proclaiming or in the Torah that we are the chosen people. Nobody likes that. There's a theory that we through the Torah have brought civility to the world, and so many things, so many human rights have changed because of the Torah and how we live our lives and our ability to be light unto the nations. It's a real tough one. I'm at a loss, as most people are, as to understand the depth of the hatred. Because as we all know, we see it all the time, that there are vile things being said about us, epitaphs, placards that people are holding at these protests. Jewish children back to the oven. How does a mother say that? I've seen women holding those placards, not Arab women, just regular Canadian women who are in line with the protesters. Jewish children back to the ovens. How does a mother say that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't, I think my activism started when I was quite young.
Yeah.
And I remember, the story of Ruby Bridges, that
Yes.
She was about 6 years old when she was one of the first to integrate into an all-white school. And I remember watching this little girl try to go to school and the mobs of people surrounding her, screaming at her, spitting at her. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I was actually in shock. And because I kept thinking, okay, I know this is United States, and this looks so familiar to what I saw of archival footage from Nazi Germany, where they were screaming on the streets of Jews. And the parallels were so obvious. And then, and that led me obviously to doing the documentary on the Little Rock Nine. And there's such hatred there's so much racism towards African Americans in the United States and other places. And why is that? Why is it that we're so opposed to and so afraid of, and there's so much hatred towards difference? That's what makes our world as rich as it is. And that's why people want to travel to other countries, because we loved exploring other cultures. And yet we're so afraid of difference. And so much hatred is spewed out of difference. And, look what we've done to them. So do I really understand? There's so much that I don't understand, Avrum. I don't understand how, Germany, which was one of the countries that was most educated and most progressive, more progressive than any other country in Europe, became a killing machine, became an anti-Semitic killing machine. How do ordinary people become monsters? And it's a question that I've asked myself so many times, and I don't have the answer to that. How do we, the last two films that I've done are about animal abuse. How do you do that? And in both documentaries, I witnessed horrific animal abuse. How do you do that? What is it about our nature that makes us do that?
When you say our nature, does that include you?
I certainly hope not, because I've never, I certainly hope not. I've intuitively been against, I've intuitively always believed that people were equal.
Yeah.
And it's very, and that when I saw Ruby Bridges, that really struck me. But also what really struck me is my parents took me to South Africa when I was in my 20s. And apartheid was very much still the law in South Africa. And I just was appalled by what I saw in front of me. I have no idea whether my relatives, because we had relatives living in Israel, living in South Africa, what they looked like. Because to me, they were so ugly. The way that they talked about Black people, South African Black people, as stupid and dirty. And I said to them finally, this is the way the Nazis talked about us. And I just remember being there in my 20s and looking at the moon at night, because I felt like I was in the twilight zone and thinking, okay, there still is Canada. I'm not in the twilight zone. There's Canada, where things are normal and people are respected. So I think, it was very intuitive of me in the belief of equality. And also my parents, I never heard them say a racist word, ever, not ever. And I think, obviously, I didn't grow up with that, and that I'm sure had an influence on them as well.
Just to pick up on that point and to go back to the Little Rock Nine, you very graciously invited me to come down to Arkansas. Yeah,
that's right.
And I will forever be indebted to you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Came.
It was a magnificent experience. It was 50-year celebration of the Little Rock Nine, and the Little Rock Nine being these 9 children who were integrated into a high school in Little Rock. And there was a lot of discussion around it at the time. Obviously, President Bill Clinton was there, and a lot of very important people to celebrate that moment of those moments 50 years prior. You talked about that little girl, who was being integrated into a white school. One of the Little Rock Nine was a girl by the name of Elizabeth. She was 16, and she didn't get the message not to come to school on a particular day, that she would be stopped from going into the school because her parents didn't have a phone.
That's right.
So she arrives at the school on a bus, and she's walking, and the mobs are hurling these disgusting epithets at her and spitting at her, trying to push her down. A young, beautiful, lovely girl dressed so nice for school. Finally, she gets to a bus bench and she sits down, and some woman comes between her and the mob. And she's yelling at them. And I tried to do a little research on this. I didn't get very much. She's yelling at them. She's saying, in 2 weeks from now, you are going to be disgusted by yourself, what you're doing to this little girl. And you said, there's still Canada, thank God. And I said to myself, there are still people like that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. She thought Elizabeth, I spoke to Elizabeth. I mean, I've been lucky enough that I have been invited every time they've had a reunion since that time we first went there. So I've been invited to 1 or 2 other ones, maybe just one other one. And so I've been able to get to know them individually as well. And Elizabeth told me she thought she was going to die. She
said that.
Yeah, because they were threatening to kill her. They were threatening to lynch her. And so she thought she was going to die that day. And her mother, I mean, they didn't have any money. And her mother bought her this new white dress to wear to school.
Yeah.
And by the time she got home, her dress was soaked with spit. And there's also a wonderful story that I love telling about Ernest Green. Ernest Green was he was one of the Little Rock Nine, and he was the first person to graduate from Little Rock High School, Central High. It was called Central High. And as each one of the students went up to get their diploma, all the crowds, I mean, this was a school of 2,000 students. So the crowds all cheered for every student that came up. But when Ernest came up to get his diploma, remember that story?
Yeah,
I do. Silent, except for his mother, his father, and Martin Luther King. And I said to Ernest, I think about this statement you said when I interviewed interviewed you that, so many years ago, that the tough decisions are the ones you make standing all alone. Because you are the ones that are responsible for making those decisions. You can ask advice, but you're the ones that have to make that final decision. And I made the decision that year to go to Central High and change everything.
Well, let me ask you something. Those kids, those 9 kids, they started with 17 children.
Mm-hmm.
And 8 of them dropped out because
Right.
they were worried about violence against them, which means 9 did not drop out, right?
Right. And the parents would lose their jobs. Not just the violence against them, but the parents would lose their jobs and be constantly harassed.
How often in your life, or how often in your 3 daughters' lives, are they, or are you approached, are you faced with the need to be so brave? And where does that come from these young kids? I saw them walking up to school, thousands of people in the mob, thousands of people, and I'm not exaggerating. And they decided that they were going to do it anyway. Where does that come from?
Well, when I asked that question of them, they said they had the right to stand up. I mean, I'm quoting from Ernest again, and what Ernest said is, I had the right to stand up, and it's only when I stood up that I was going to change anything. And they wanted a better education. These were brilliant students. And the education they were getting at the African-American schools didn't even come close to the education they would be getting at the white schools. I mean, they had so much better materials and reading materials. And there was no comparison between what was available at white schools as compared to what was available at black schools. And they wanted a better education. And they knew that someone had to make the change. And if no one would do it, the change would never be made. So whatever that was, whatever courage they had, it was a need to become better educated. And it was a need to change something that had to be changed. And I also think when you're young, you don't realize exactly what you were getting yourself into, but their parents also taught them that they had to stand up, because only when they stood up were changes possible. And as you know, Avrum, I mean, every day that they were in that school, the army took them to the school so they could finally get in, but they weren't with them during the day. They were on their own, and these kids were all separated in different classes. And every single day they were assaulted, every single day in that entire year. They were pushed against, the boys were punched, they were pushed against their lockers. Every day they were assaulted. And they were only allowed to go to school and then come home. They were not allowed to participate in any of the extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
And I remember when Kalada, one of the Little Rock Nine, came over to our home for dinner. Ellie was there as well. And Ellie asked them, did any of them ever show you any sense of decency and acceptance? And Kalada said, one day, one of the white students said to me, wasn't the homework hard that night? Wasn't the homework hard that night? And she just talked to her like another human being. And that's what stayed in her mind, that for that one day, she was just treated like another student. So where does that courage come from? Yeah. I don't know. Where does the courage come from? Where does the courage come from for people who weren't Jewish, that hid Jews, knowing that their lives could be ended? Where's the courage coming from the from Nobody, who stood up against a regime? Where did the courage comes from these girls, young girls and men and women in Iran who stood up, who continues to stand up and protest against the regime? I admire them, and they give me faith in the human race. And I don't know where their courage comes from, but I'm in awe of it.
Can you hear the alarm going off here?
Yeah.
I'm tempted to really stop the interview and pick up on it when this ends. It's just what you're saying.
How come there's an alarm?
Maybe there's a fire in the building. I don't know. I'm
you?
trying to show my courage.
I know.
But I am so fascinated about what you're saying, and there's so much to unpack. There's so much to think about it. So what I'm going to try to do is keep this going, and I would just simply ask the listeners, bear with it, because I think what you're listening,
everybody, bear with
was
it.
it? Yeah, bear with it, because I think what you're hearing is really well worth hearing. We were talking about courage and bravery. I've quoted a study out of Israel a number of times on my shows. And just to cut to the chase, there was a sociologist who asked about 350 righteous Gentiles, people who saved Jewish lives during the war, at the risk of their own life and at the risk of their children's lives. And she asked the 350 righteous Gentiles, how did you have the courage to do that? Fern, you think about it. God forbid, we say in Hebrew, chas v'chalila, I have one boy. And if I was faced with the challenge of saving someone who was being put upon in our society at the risk of his life, I honestly don't know if I would do it. But the answer was the same across the board. And I'm really curious about what you have to say about that.
What's that?
Each of them said that when they were young, when they were little, their parents taught them as they were walking along the road and they saw somebody sitting by the roadside who was clearly in need, homeless, let's say, to go over to them, to kneel down so that they were eye to eye, and to speak to them in a civil way, in a caring way, in a warm and loving way, and ask them per their welfare.
Wow.
They basically said that we were taught how to be empathetic. So therefore, when the war came and we were faced with the challenge of rescuing a Jew, it came to us naturally. The idea is that empathy is a learned behavior. What's your take on that?
Well, God, I wish I would have done the same thing with my kids. That's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, they've learned about equality. Certainly my daughters have learned about equality, and I'm very proud to say that there isn't a racist bone in my daughters' bodies, and would stand up. But I think is that what separates them, the people that stood up and helped the Jews, from everybody else? Because I don't understand it, Avrum. I really don't. When I've heard about these horrible atrocities, when I heard about what went on October the 7th, and the absolute horror they inflicted on these families, on these young women, on babies, how do you, I don't understand it. How can you do that to another human being? And where does empathy come in? And how do you shut that down and can be so cruel and not see the fear and horror in someone else's eyes? I don't understand how we can be so incredible, that we can be that brave to stand up and hide another Jewish person, knowing that that puts your life in danger. And yet at the same time, our nature is to destroy and torture. I don't understand human beings. And I'm at the point where I don't know if I ever truly will. But if their parents taught them empathy, I think that's an incredible lesson that all parents need to teach their children. And maybe that's how we build a better world. I don't know. I don't understand how these university students are standing up and demanding that the Palestinians should be free from the river to the sea, when they have no idea about what life is like for them under Hamas. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I mean, if we can simplify things, perhaps you're right. Perhaps the idea is that we put far more resources towards teaching empathy. Maybe that's the idea. Because I know, you know me, and I was raised by in a rabbinical home by a man who was an activist like you. And he also taught us how to be sympathetic and empathetic towards others by bringing people into our home. We had people living with us for a day, for a week, for a year, for 2 years. And the outside world became part of our inside world. So when I see suffering in the world, unfortunately, it's not unusual to me, because I've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. It was in our house. People whose lives were just so incredibly put upon. One young woman who had been abducted by a motorcycle gang, a Jewish woman. My father somehow got her and brought her into our home, and she stayed with us for a long time. I think that's it. I think it's the idea is you need to be courageous and sacrifice to show your children what it means to help others. Like you really have to do it. You got to get your hands dirty, right? I'm gonna guess by your daughter seeing your films, seeing what you do, knowing your story of driving to Quebec, that must have a major impact on them.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I hope that they saw that I mean, I hope it's had an impact on them that I went to Israel despite the fact of how that the country's at war. But I do know that my middle daughter, Dana, has always volunteered to other countries to go to other countries and help out. When she was 16, the tsunami hit in Thailand. And we said to our kids, we will do whatever you want on your 16th birthday. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And she said, I want to go to Thailand. I'll never forget it. I was in the office as I am right now. And she said, I want to go to Thailand and help out. And what an incredible experience that was. And then 2 years ago, when Russia went to war with Ukraine, my daughter again came up to me and said, let's go and volunteer. Let's help the Ukrainian refugees. So we went to Poland, where many of the refugees had come, and we helped out there as well. And then the minute the war started in Israel, Dana's first response was, I'm going to volunteer. And I said to her, no, you're not. There's a war going on. You can't go and volunteer. And then, of course, I went and volunteered myself. But yeah, for our kids see that both Arnie and I care and volunteer and do what we can to make the world a better place, that it's helpful, that everybody has to do something. And yes, they were definitely raised by parents like us.
I have to ask you this because I'm always fascinated by where people come from, who their parents were. And your parents were Hamiltonians, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Your father was Norman, your mother was Blanche. By the way, who was your mother named after? Where does someone get a name like Blanche?
I don't know. Great grandmother somewhere. Who knows?
Yeah, fascinating. Anyways, what would you say their fundamental character was like? You know, I want to understand where you came from, what your household was like.
That's a big question. Well, I think that my talents, I'll answer that in two ways. My mother was a great storyteller. My grandmother was a great storyteller. They could just sit and tell stories. And that's where I believe I got my abilities. I inherited my storytelling abilities. And my father would just always loved a challenge. And I remember when he went to Russia during the hockey games, and he had a Canadian flagpole, and he kept hitting the heads of the KGB. And he was just tenacious. He was always willing to go for a challenge. So I got my tenacity for sure from him, and I got my storytelling abilities from him. But it wasn't a happy home. I wasn't raised in a happy home. I think my father had a terrible temper, and I never felt safe in that home. Not that, no, I never really felt safe in that home because I was walking on eggshells all the time, whether he was going to be angry or whether he was going to be loving. I never kind of knew that. And they put a lot of restrictions on me, and I'm rebellious. And they had these expectations that I would, marry a doctor or marry a lawyer, and didn't have any expectations that I was going to do something with my life that was meaningful. And I knew at a very young age that I had to have a very different life than my mother had. I knew it. I knew that I somehow intuitively knew that my life was going to be different. I didn't know how it was going to be different or how that was going to happen, but I knew that my life was going to be different. And I was also raised with a lot of restrictions of who I could marry and who I couldn't marry. And if I married someone who wasn't Jewish, I was going to be disowned. And I knew that was wrong. I can understand it more as an adult, but I knew then as a teenager that was wrong, that I had a right to love who I wanted to love. And they couldn't tell me who I wanted to love or what I could do with my life. So I spent a lot of time with a lot of tension because with a great deal of tension, because I would date who I wanted to do and did it behind their backs. And I went to parties if I wanted to do that and did it behind their backs. And always was afraid that I was going to be found out. So I had a rebellious spirit. And it's so funny, when I met Arnie, my husband, I didn't think he was Jewish. And I knew I was going to marry him. Again, I have this intuitive feelings. I knew I was going to marry him when I first saw him. And I thought, okay, if they disown me, they're going to disown me. But I'm going to marry this man. And it wasn't until 6 months later that I found out that he was Jewish, and he found out I was Jewish. But in that way, I felt it was socially unjust. Their expectations on me, they kind of put me in kind of this box, this square, and I didn't fit into any of that. And I had to fight for who I was and what I wanted. And in film, I was able to really develop that. And through the stories of the people that I tell, who live a different life and stood up against injustice.
It's interesting because I had a similar experience growing up. My father also had a very bad temper. My mother did too, but we weren't as afraid of her temper. Mm-hmm. And it took me a long time to delineate between my father as a leader, of which he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and my father as a father to me. It was tough. It was really, really tough. But eventually I was able to do it through some help from friends who adored my parents and were able to express to me how warm they were towards them and how warm they were towards the congregation. So I was able to come to grips with that. Over the years, as we get older, have you been able to, let's say, forgive your father?
Have I been able to forgive my father? I wish that I had the conversation with him before he died. I wish I was more to who I am today, and had that conversation with him before I died, because he had to be a very unhappy man himself.
Yeah.
I think that he was also abused by his father, and he had to be a very unhappy man himself. And, and what that did to him to be physically abusive towards his own children. Have I forgiven him? It's had its impact on me, Avrum. There's no question that it's had its impact on me. And but I recognize that it had its impact on me and went for therapy, lots of therapy through the years. And again, I'm lucky that I found film so I could put that anger and that hurt into in a very productive way. And I think about, I love to learn. I just love to learn. And that's one of the reasons that I love making documentaries, because you really have to get a doctorate in every one of the subjects that you tackle. You really have to know your stuff. Right. And I love the research. I think the research is the part of documentary filmmaking that I enjoy the most, because you learn so much about something you knew absolutely nothing about. And I was a terrible student in school. I failed grade 6. I didn't do well. I didn't do well at all. When all my other friends were accelerating and getting 80s and 90s, and I was barely passing. And I wonder, why is that? Why was I barely passing in school when I have such a love of learning? And I think it was because I was in my own little world to escape what was going on at home.
Yeah, I get that.
And so, have I forgiven him? That's a hard one to know, because I also realize I've had a wonderful life. I've had a really wonderful life. And, I'm married to a wonderful man. I have 3 daughters that I'm extremely proud of. And I've got this incredible career. Yeah. I have this incredible career. So maybe if I didn't have the father that I had, the mother that I had, who tried to put me in some kind of shoebox, I wouldn't have learned how to fight. Because to be a documentary filmmaker, you have to fight to get your documentaries documentaries made, and you have to fight to get the stories that you want and the people that you want to interview. And no is not part of my vocabulary. I always look at no as a challenge to turn it into a yes. I don't know if you read that newspaper article on how I got the documentary with Gorbachev, how I got the interview with Gorbachev, but it was true. It was all true. I begged. I absolutely begged and lied and pleaded. And so have I forgiven him, to get back to your story? I don't know, Avrum. I don't know if I've forgiven him.
Yeah.
But if what I had to go through led me to this extraordinary life that I have today, because home was only the first 18 years of my life, but I've had the rest of my life. And when I knew as a child that my life was going to be different, I didn't have any appreciation on how different and how extraordinary it has turned out to be.
Well, you wrote me yesterday that documentary making saved you. Was that hyperbolic or was that real?
Oh, it was real.
Well, how do you mean it saved you?
Real.
How did it save you?
Because I was someone who had no talents in anything. I didn't. I had no talents. I was terrible in school. I wasn't athletic. I wasn't artistic. Every time I tried to learn how to play piano, I wasn't. So I wasn't good at anything.
You're a great cook. You're a great cook.
No, I'm not. I don't even like cooking.
I've been at your house for dinner.
I know, but I do it. But that doesn't mean I like it.
Oh, okay.
The same salmon and pasta.
Over and over.
And I've perfected that recipe. And so I grew up with tremendous amounts of insecurities and not believing in who I was or what I was. And when I became a documentary filmmaker, I remember the first time I made a documentary, and it was about a teacher who was wrongfully accused of sexually abusing a student. And I remember doing a paper cut, a paper edit. And it was it came as easy to me as breathing. Like it was I could just see all the parts coming together. And it was the first time in my life that something came easy to me.
Nice.
And then one thing, of course, led to another. And if I didn't, and so it taught me that I did have this talent, that I do have the ability not to say no, not to take no for an answer, that I can interview, a skill that you have, that you too have. I mean, I've seen you interview, you're amazing. That I can interview, that I can fight to get these stories told, and that I can fight to continue to justice for the stories that I tell. So I had no idea that I had these abilities. I knew I had something, but I didn't know what that something was. And
that is the greatest feeling in the world, by the way. I call it hitting your stride. And I don't mean to be I don't mean to be an armchair psychologist, although I do mean to. I like to delve deeply. Yeah, I like to delve deeply into. Is it possible that all of your documentaries and the success of your documentaries and the freedom that you've given people because of them, is it possible that is forgiveness to your father, those documentaries? Because he was hard on you. He was hard. He was so hard on you. And again, I
hard on all of us. He was hard on all of us.
Okay, but in your case, because you're the person I'm interviewing, he taught you something really, really special through it. And because of it, and although that was not his motivation, you came out of it a very powerful human being, right?
Thank you.
And then you said about using that to create these wonderful documentaries. I would say to you at some point, you can sort of look up at the sky and thank God. And you can look up there and say, thank you, Dad. You taught me something really special.
Well, I do thank them. And thanking them and forgiving them are two very different things. But I do feel gratitude.
True.
Because, as I said before, my mother gave me the ability to storytell. And that's what documentaries are. That's what movies are. That's what books are. It's storytelling. And my father gave me the ability to be completely tenacious, to take that risk, and to break rules. So the combination of having both of their personalities is a perfect combination as a documentary filmmaker. So I'm grateful for that.
Years ago, I think it was around 2008, you and I did a documentary called Living Through Dying. And we set about interviewing, I believe it was 3 people who were dying. One was a woman who had ALS.
Oh, God.
You remember that?
Oh, God, how can I forget that?
And one of the things that stayed with me, by the way, and I just told someone this recently, the hardship of her ALS was that her kids started to ignore her. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
It was too hard. They would come home from school. They were little kids. Mommy wasn't present like she used to be. She couldn't hold them. And that struck me as being so incredibly tragic. But it was very sensitive, I think, of us to do that documentary because so many people are dealing with such hardships, right? Are you aware of your ultimate demise? Do you know that one day you will not be on this earth?
Yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it? Can we just go back a bit? You did some brilliant interviewing with her. Like, I'll never forget that. Yeah, I'll never forget that. When you pushed them. You pushed them. And out of that came the most brilliant interview from her husband saying,
yeah, remember that?
Do you remember that?
I do.
Saying how much he loved her.
Yeah, I remember that. I haven't thought of that in a long time.
Yeah, how much he loved her. And I remember you questioning him and pushing him, and he didn't want to say anything, and you kept pushing it. And I'm saying, oh, and I'm thinking, Avrum, leave it alone, leave it alone. Like, he doesn't want to talk about it. His wife is dying. And out of that pushing, out of that probing, came the most beautiful tribute to his wife that he possibly could have said. I learned something from that, Avrum. You know, I learned something because it was right there when he said that. It was right there, but it took you to get him to say what he really wanted to say and say that to her before she died. And I felt that, and it taught me as an interviewer that you have to be sensitive. I mean, you must have known that he was willing to go there, but he just needed you to help him.
Well, you hope, right, Fern? You hope.
You knew it.
You might be giving me more credit than I deserve, but
do it because you're sensitive enough that if he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't have, and he would have been angry at you, and he wasn't angry at you. He came up with the most beautiful testimony of his love for his wife. I'll never forget that and learn from that as well.
Thanks for reminding me that.
I'll never forget it. I can still see it in my head because it was so powerful.
The reason I asked you this question about your own demise, you should be well till 120.
I don't want to live that long. So
I don't either.
Films, or I can't ride my horse, or I can't ski. I'm out of here.
Yeah, I hear you. But the reason I asked you is because when I watched your documentary, The 761st, about a Black battalion in the Second World War, who were strong, who were heroic, who were brave, who were probably better than so many other battalions because as Black soldiers, they had to prove themselves. So many of them died. So many went into the field of battle, right, and passed away. You have documented a lot of that stuff through your films. And I'm guessing that inevitably you must ask yourself a lot of questions in the wee hours of the night when you're lying in bed and it's dark in your room. You know, these people gave up their lives and they're no longer here. What does that mean about me? Am I giving up my life? What about when I'm no longer here? As someone who's 64, I'm definitely thinking about the end of my days.
Oh, me too.
It's not foremost in my thinking, but it's there more so. Is that part of your thinking as well?
Yeah, I'm going to be 70 this year. I can't
believe
you're
turning 70.
I can't believe I'm going to be 70.
Honestly,
I can't believe it. I honestly can't believe it.
How old are you in your head?
A lot younger than that.
Yeah.
As long as I keep riding and skiing, I'm a lot younger and making films. But I feel it, Avrum. I do, and I'm in good shape, but I do feel that it's not as easy as it used to be, that I get tired more often. And, I've got much less years ahead of me than I have, that I am becoming towards the end of my life. And it's hard for me to believe that I'm not going to be here at any time now because I'm going to be 70. And so how many more years do you have left? And also, I don't want to live if I'm not productive. I don't want to live like that. I want to. I've been very lucky. I have a healthy body, and I'm grateful to that. I have a wonderful family, and I'm grateful to that. But so when my time comes, my time comes. And I don't want to live on this earth if I'm not who I am. And who I am is someone who needs to be productive, who needs to feel that my life is contributing to the betterment of this world. I have to do that. Now that I just finished one documentary on the elephants, it's like, okay, now what do I do? Now what can I do? And I kept thinking, I was so busy that I can't wait to just take a breath, but I'm not built to take that breath. So I want to live until I can't live anymore. And I know that sooner than later. And isn't it hard to believe that you're not going to be here on Earth?
Oh yeah, it's very difficult.
Like, that's kind of like such a freaky thought.
If tomorrow was your last day, God forbid, would you say that you did well?
Yeah. Yes, I would say that I did well, that I am proud of the life that I've lived, and proud of the contributions that I've made. And I feel incredibly lucky. I feel so lucky because whatever that is, I think the universe brought this for me. And how did I get so lucky? How did I get so lucky that I'm able to live in this country where there's freedom?
Yeah.
How did I get so... I mean, I never thought about being a documentary filmmaker until a therapist that I was seeing said to me, Fern, you've got a lot of visual abilities. Did you know that you're a visual thinker? And I had no idea that that's the way I learn and that I am a visual thinker. And the minute he said it to me, I had like this epiphany that I should be a filmmaker. And it never occurred to me before until he said those words. And then throughout my life, one thing has led to the documentaries that I've made. So let me just tell you quickly, Avrum, I had just finished doing a Holocaust film where I came home and the images of the gas chambers and all the horror that took place stayed in my head. And I said to Arnie, let's go dog sledding. It's on my bucket list. I love dogs. I love being in nature. It helped get rid of those images of what I just saw. And then we went dog sledding, and it was like going from one concentration camp to another. When I saw the way the dogs lived, it was horrific. And then ended up bringing a dog home, Slater, who I'm sure you've met. Mm-hmm. And at the same time that happened, it became on the national and even international news that 50 dogs had been slaughtered in Whistler. I don't know if you remember that. That was 2000. Yeah. And then I have to make a documentary on this. That's how it came to me. And had I not gone dog sledding, had I not taken Slater home, had that not happened in Whistler, I never would have made that film. And all those things kind of came together to bring me to that subject. And the same thing after I finished making Sled Dogs, I thought, I'm never going to make another documentary about animals again. It's too painful. I can't do it. And then someone sent me a picture of Lucy, the elephant that lives in the Edmonton Valley Zoo, in this glass prison that she lives in. And I still see myself looking at that picture and I'm saying, I have to help her. But that was true for all my documentaries. I mean, Rudy Bridges that I saw when I was such a young child. The minute I started making documentaries for History Television, that was which led me to the Little Rock Nine. Those were the stories I wanted to talk about. So, so these stories just kind of come to me. And then whether it's the universe or whatever that is, I've been able to find the stories and the storytellers to help me make those films.
It's very compelling. You said before, you almost have to become a doctor, get your doctorate.
Get your doctorate.
So I want you to know that every time I do a podcast, I sort of ensconce myself in my guests' lives. So I've been reading and researching you for the last week or so, and I've been watching your documentaries. Fern Levitt. Avrum, can you go out? No, I'm busy with Fern Levitt. I'm learning about her.
And how was that, Avrum? How was that?
Oh, it's wonderful, Fern. I really put myself in a place where I get to know you so well, and I've known you for so many years, but watching your body of work is magnificent, Fern.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
your work is so outstanding, and it's produced so well.
Thank
But my question leading out of that is, you know a lot about a lot now, at least in terms of what the subject matter that you covered. Can you tell us, as you've just finished the documentary on elephants, what are they like? What are elephants like?
Oh, it's heartbreaking. You know, it's really heartbreaking. And if this film doesn't help them, I know I'm going to take it very personally. They're incredible. Like they are incredible. I want people to realize that these are highly intelligent animals, and that family, like in the Jewish religion, means everything to them. So they stay with the females, stay with their families throughout their lives, and their grandmothers and their aunts and their mothers teach them everything they need to know to survive in the wild. And the birth is a celebration for the entire herd. They trumpet and they celebrate, and everybody comes together to celebrate and help the new mother with this baby. And then when someone in their herd dies, they have a shiva. Did you know that? They have a shiva where they stand over the body and protect it and stay there for days on end. So there's so much similarities with elephants to us as human beings. The way that their families mean so much to them, and they mourn when they lose a member of their family. But they also play an incredibly important role in keeping our planet balanced. So when we take them out of where they belong, not only is that horrible for them, not only is that animal abuse, but it's also destructive to our planet. Because as they're marching every day, walking every day through a diverse environment, and they roam about 50, 60 kilometers a day, and they're eating all this vegetation as they go looking for food, keeping away from predators. And they're eating all this vegetation that comes through their bodies and comes out as fertilized seeds. So because of these elephants, more vegetation grows, not only for them, for all the other animals and insects that are living in the wild. And they tear down branches of trees, which allow more sunlight to fertilize these plants. And we know how important plants are for our environment, you know, how important it is. And so when we hunt them down, or when we take them and put them in zoos, put them in these confined spaces, we're hurting them, and and ultimately we're hurting ourselves, because we're hurting our planet.
Was there one particular day or days where you felt like, man, this was an honor? What if I never would have seen this? I can't believe I'm being witness to this.
I felt that it was an honor. I feel like it's an honor. Oh yeah, when we were filming them in the wild, and I can see the baby suckling on its mother, nursing from its mother, and you just see the difference in elephants that are living in the wild to those that are standing there in zoos with no place to go and nothing to do. And learning about them was such an honor. Learning about them, but what was a real honor to me is meeting the people that have given their lives to help them. That's who are fighting to get Lucy to a sanctuary, from Edmonton to a sanctuary. Scott Bias, who has opened up a sanctuary in Brazil. He's from Canada, and he worked at the African lion safari and saw the horrific treatment towards elephants and other animals there. And he's now spending his life with elephants. He's opened up a sanctuary in Brazil and taking elephants that were in zoos or circuses. And he and his wife devoted their lives, giving these lives back to these elephants. So I really feel very honored that the people that are in the film, or the films that I do, trust me and tell me their stories. I mean, what an honor that is, Avrum. Mm-hmm. They don't know who I am or what I'm going to do. So they're taking a risk, and for them to be happy with how the film has come out means everything. But their trust in me means everything to me. So
You know,
Yeah.
there was a story that came out of the Ukraine at the beginning of the war of an animal activist who left her town because it was being bombed by the Russians. Well, because she was so caring of the animals, she knew that there were certain animals that had been trapped in the town, and she went back to rescue them, and she went back and she was killed.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Should we do that?
Gee, I don't know. I was just in Israel, and this one woman was telling a story. She lived in that town, in that small town where the where Hamas had come in and were shooting and killing, and we all know what they were doing. And she worked in this daycare, and this daycare or these schools were for the Ethiopian refugees. And she was so afraid of what was going to happen to them, or were they okay? Were they going to be okay? That her husband wanted her to leave and go to Tel Aviv, and where it was safe. And she refused to go, and took a huge risk in going into the town and staying with the people that lived in that school area, and to make sure that they were safe. And she couldn't believe that she actually did this, was actually risking her life to make sure that these people that she cared for, the children that she cared for, were safe. And she went back. So can you equate animals with human beings? To me, when you told me that story, it reminded me of her, who risked her life to make sure that she could be there and to protect these young children and these young families.
Would you go back for animals?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I question myself, if I lived during Nazi Germany, would I protect someone who's Jewish? If I lived in Iran, would I be brave enough to stand up and protest? If I lived in Russia, would I be brave enough to stand up and protest against Putin? And I can't answer that question. I know that I couldn't live. I know that I would be ashamed of myself if I didn't do something and join the others who were courageous enough to do something. But am I brave enough to stand up knowing what could happen to me by standing up? I don't know. And I'm so fortunate that I've never had to answer that question.
What do you see in animals, Fern?
What we lack? Empathy.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, how they contribute to our planet, how we destroy this beautiful planet that we live in, and how they contribute to this planet. How I've learned how they contribute from the largest animal to the smallest insect, from the largest whale to the smallest, guppy in the ocean. They all have a role to play in keeping our planet balanced.
But I think it's more because when I asked you to do the podcast today at 2:00, you had just come back from Israel shortly ago. You said you want to see your horse.
Yeah, I missed him.
Whenever I speak to you about your animals, be it your horse or your dog, your relationship to elephants, now that you've done this, it seems to me that and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me that you see them as being very regal, and you see them very elegant, and you also see them as being very exposed. Am I correct there?
I'm in awe of them, actually. I'm really in awe of them. I really am in awe of animals. And I'm in awe of what dogs can do. I did a documentary on autistic children and the difference when their parents brought home service dogs.
Yeah.
The empathy that they show, the joy that they bring into people's lives, dogs, cats, and even horses, even my horse. I put a saddle on him and I put a bit in his mouth and he protects me. So I really am in awe of them. And it hurts. It really hurts when I see how we as human beings abuse them. It really hurts me. And I'm lucky enough because I honor them. I'm in awe of them. And so it really physically hurts me when I read about the abuse. And I'm lucky enough, Avrum, that I have a platform to expose it. But I know how difficult it is, how difficult change is. So then I start getting upset with myself. Have I done enough? Have I contributed enough? Have I fought enough to bring about change? Because I made Sled dogs in 2016, and there has been some changes, but certainly not fast enough, and certainly not enough. But I'm also encouraged too that change is coming. When I speak to kids your son's age, he has such a different perspective than I did when I was his age. He questions. Kids his age are questioning the validity, the moral ethics of going to zoos. I never did. I took my kids to zoos. And they also value animals and see them as sentient beings the way I never did when I was his age. So I see change coming in your son's generation, more awareness, and documentaries have a unique way of educating, even more powerful than the written word, because you see the images as well as hear them, and you can see it for yourself, and the images are very powerful. So I'm encouraged that way, but I just wish change didn't take so long.
Granted, I feel the same way. I also wanted to share with you a thought and ask a question with it to wrap up the interview, although we could go on for hours. I used to wonder about documentarians or directors, producers, about their limitations in life. You look at the well-known directors and how many films that they did in their lifetime. 20 films.
Really? Are you sure?
15. What would you say?
Oh, I don't know. I never really thought about it, actually.
Yeah. So you want to say,
is that all the films they've made in their lifetime?
Yeah, I was just reading. I was reading about was it John Huston? I think he did like 20 films, many with John Candy, and I thought, my God, what limitations! But then I realized, you know what? It's not the quantity; it's more of the effect. So, as an example, you did a wonderful documentary about Gorbachev. You said you said that you believe he was the greatest leader we've ever seen. And I'm going to guess you
Mandela. Yes,
and
I
Mandela.
do.
Okay,
Mandela.
but I'm going to guess you said that because of their courage and their bravery to make change amongst millions, which proliferated throughout the world. Today we have a Putin, and he's not following up on Gorbachev's dream. But the fact of the matter is, it seeped into all of us. So I think that it is the intensity of it. It's the classic nature of what we do, so that it lasts forever. And I do believe that your body of work will last forever, Fern, because it has that texture to it. It has that feeling to it. So when you say, did I do enough? Any great person is going to ask that question. We always feel like we've never done enough. But I believe that the messages that you tried to get out there, they will continue for years and years and years to come. I do believe that.
Well, thanks to our friend Ellie. He said, well, do you have a Wikipedia page? And I said, no.
Yeah.
No. So he made sure my films were out there. But thank you. I mean, look at what you do, Avrum. I mean, I admire the people that try to, in their way, to make the world a better place. And you certainly have done that. And by interviewing, people can be very inspiring. I mean, God knows they inspired me to tell their stories in film. So we need to, with all the terrible things that are going on now when the world feels so oppressive, we have to hear their stories to encourage us.
So the question I have for you is, there's a lot of people who are watching this show. There's a lot of people out there who feel as though they don't have purpose in life. I've met so many people like that, and especially as people get older and their careers become less important to them, they don't feel like they have meaning. And one of the messages that I always try to put forward and elicit from my guests is, what is your message to those people? You've said a number of times throughout this podcast that you feel so incredibly blessed.
Lucky.
And I asked you that definitive question, if God forbid tomorrow were your last day, would you say that you've done a good job? Your answer straight away was yes. So impart something to those individuals who are struggling to find purpose and meaning in their lives.
Find passion. Find your passion. I mean, I strongly believe that each one of us has a talent. As I said to you, I wasn't good at anything, but filmmaking came to me as easy as breathing. And I have a tremendous passion to tell these stories. And I think that people, I know that people that live with passion, whether their passion is art or music, or whatever that passion is, maybe it's sports, whatever it is, even if your job doesn't give you that passion, find something in life that does, whether it's volunteering or whether it's helping others. People that live a life of passion live a life. And I think that I know that that's the most important thing that we need to strive for, is to live a life of meaning and find that passion. Each one of us has something that excites them or makes them want to do that, whatever that is. And people need to find that passion, and that'll make them feel a much more fulfilled and happier human being.
How old were you when you found documentary?
35.
Okay.
35, when I first got my first job at TV Ontario.
Well, Fern, I want to thank you so much for doing
Thanks,
this.
Avrum. No, I really appreciate it. It's so easy talking to you, and that's why I knew you're a safe person to talk to. And when you said, is there anything that you don't want to talk about? No, absolutely, because you have that ability to make you feel safe and to make me feel, even though we're talking on a screen, to make me feel heard and valued. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for what you said about my films. That means a lot to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to thank all of my viewers as well for taking the time to listen and watch the show, and to reiterate what it is that Fern said, that final message, which is that it's really important in life that you find your passion, and they will become your goals. Now, the next question is, how do I find my passion, right? And that's not always so easy. I think, Fern, it's safe to say that when you found your passion, you probably went, oh, thank God I discovered it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it's not always easy to do that.
No, that's why I was lucky, because the minute my therapist said that to me, I knew it was right.
So listen to a lot of people, listen to a lot of interviews. I tell people, go to the library, go to the public library, and walk down the stacks, walk down the aisles, and see where you organically just naturally stop. See what subjects really, really grab you and reach out to you. When you're listening to a speaker, if you go to a lecture or you're watching a film, gauge your response to their words. Listen very closely to your inner voice. And if there is somebody who's talking about human behavior from the point of view of a psychologist, well, you know what? It might be that you'd be a really good therapist. It might be that's a road that you should go down. Food. There are people who are so incredibly passionate about food and recipes and spices. Listen to that voice inside of you. Be very attentive to it, because it's the most important voice in your life. And once you determine that you have responded to a particular topic or issue or person, start to research it, start to dive into it, and really, really get closer to that thing which I call the zone. And when you are in the zone, there is nothing like it. All the kerfuffle and all the noise kind of stops, and you concentrate on what's important to you at that moment, at that time. And that's the thing that Fern calls your gift, of which I concur. We all have it. And of course, you're welcome to call me or be in touch if you need to talk about potentially what your gift is, because I'm all about that. And I see people who discover it, and it brings them so much satisfaction and so much happiness. Right, Fern?
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you for listening. It's been wonderful to have you as my guest, Fern. And I look forward to continuing. I'm sure we'll have further interviews down the road. Have a beautiful holiday, folks. This is the holiday of Passover for the Jewish people. Bring peace to the world. Do everything you can to reach out to others, Jew, non-Jew, whomever it is. Make friends with the stranger. Get to know them. Allow them to know you. Let us find that mutual language that'll make this world really the incredible place that it has the ability to be. Thank you so much. I'm Yisrael Chai. The nation of Israel lives. We shall see you soon.